Hi, my name is Navidi Perera. I am a past captain of the debate club of St. Bridget's Convent, and I am their current junior coach. And the motion I'll be debriefing for you today is this house prefers the integrationist over the accommodationist constitution building model in post-independent states. So the motion comes as an Infoslide, which the motion and the info slide should be included in the description if you want to check that. And how we'll be going about with the debrief is first we'll do a slight overview on the info slide on what each of the models are, and then we'll move on to proposition and then opposition in terms of setup and arguments. So moving on to the first part of the debrief, which is the info slide. So the info slide states that an integrationist model is where you have a unified national identity, where you have one common identity for all nations, for all citizens of the country, where you have uniform policy, where you have one common language and one common culture, right? A hypothetical example, if we take Sri Lanka, we can consider everyone to be Sri Lankan as opposed to Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, or Burgher. So you have one national identity. On the flip side, in an accommodationist model, this is where you recognize different identities. This is where you have inclusive policy, and you represent these you represent different minorities, and you embrace this diversity. Okay, you give prominence to this diversity. But so moving on to a proposition, the uniqueness of this motion is where it's set, right, where the debate takes place. For setup, I have 2 points. Firstly, on where it takes place, a post-independent state. What does a post-independent state look like? Second point of setup is what is constitution building and why is it important. So if we move on to the first point of setup on what a post-independent state looks like, this is very crucial. The understanding of what a post-independent state looks like is very crucial for this debate, right? Because whatever characteristics that are prevalent in a post-independent state, you'll have to understand the characteristics of each model that is proposed and then sort of tally the characteristics with relevance to the uniqueness of a post-independent state. So moving on to what a post-independent state looks like, note that these states are countries that have just ended their colonial rule. They've gotten rid of colonizers and they've just established independence. They've just achieved liberation. Okay, so one thing to note about colonial rule, one thing to note about colonizers is they don't really care for the citizens of the country that they're colonizing. They're only there for economic gain, for their own gain. So when they leave, they don't leave in a way that is beneficial for the country. What colonizers try to do when they leave a country is they try to pit different minorities against each other, or like a majority against a minority. They prey on maybe existing segregation, or they create new forms of segregation, right? This is what colonizers trying to do. This characterization is very important because in proposition you're saying that you employ an integrationist constitution building model. This is where you consider everyone to be equal, everyone to be of the same nation, of like the same national identity, right? This directly addresses and this directly goes against what these colonizers are trying to do. This is very important, right? And this is likely to work, which I'll prove in a bit. But this model itself is more suited for a country like this, for a post-independent state. Now, a post-independent state, the political sphere of a post-independent state is very likely to be unstable. There is probably no permanent structure of governance. Maybe there's a weak structure of governance or whatever is passed down from the colonial rule that people are very unlikely to follow because they want to eradicate that. But overall, there is a clean slate to start on, like a fresh, you can take a fresh start. Another important thing to note is the ideology or the mindset of the people. These people, even if the colonizers like try to pit them against each other, they just achieved a massive success, right? They worked together to eradicate foreign influence. This means that they ride on, you know, the highs of victory, of like a massive victory. This means they oversee the differences between each other and they celebrate this victory as one whole nation. This is very important because they have a deep embedded sense of unity amongst them, because they had one common problem and they worked together and, you know, achieved whatever success that the success that they were looking for. They were able to attain independence. Okay, so these communities are already, these nations are already united. They have a very high spirit. They have a positive outlook on what the future might potentially hold for them, right? For as long as the politician, for as long as whoever is setting the constitution doesn't pit them against each other, they are unlikely to choose trauma all over again, right? Because they've already gone through enough. They're more likely to want a stable future as opposed to go back into civil unrest. So these people themselves will be are more likely to be tolerant to this level of change. They want this level of like radical change. They want to feel the stability. They want security. They're desperate for security, right? Which will be provided through an integrationist constitution building model. So second point of setup then on constitution building in itself. The constitution is basically a legal documentation for what the identity of a nation is, right? To build this, it's a very complex procedure. You require resources and you require a lot of time. You require a lot of discourse and a lot of time. Unfortunately, these post-independent states don't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury of time. Why? Because they're already sort of lagging behind in terms of identity, in terms of stability compared to the international community. This means that they're losing out on that development and they need to establish it very fast. They need to establish control very fast to keep up with the same pace of development, right? This is why it's needed. This is why constitution is needed, like it's basically needed, and it's needed fast. Okay, so that is what the integrationist constitution building model offers to you. It offers a preservation of time, the way you like hold off of, you know, wasting resources, where you can better cater to like the intricate issues as opposed to petty fights over which ethnicity is more supreme, because that is not the biggest priority for these nations right now. The biggest priority for these nations is establishing power, establishing stability for the people, right? So the substantives for this motion would look like, first, on how it caters to the upliftment of the whole country, and second, on a higher quality of legislation and policy. So first, substantive on how it caters to upliftment of the whole country is it creates a strong sense of national unity, again, because, you know, one nation, there is no discrimination, and this is important because it creates stability. It also creates good morale. See, these people are already very highly spirited. When there are no politicians pitting them against each other, they are going to focus this, they are going to redirect their energy from, you know, trying to establish superiority to building the country from ground up, right? They are going to focus their energy on building the country, on development as a whole for the entire nation. Okay, so this is important. This can be attained through integration, the integrationist model, as opposed to the accommodationist model, where you sort of still have that sense of segregation. Okay, so then on a second level, how it caters to the upliftment of the society is it benefits the majority in the long run. See, now when you don't have to focus on like different ethnicities, on your differences, you can uniformly distribute resources, right? You can basically employ better infrastructure building. You can focus on different things because you finish building your constitution relatively faster. Okay, this is again important because the country establishes power, the government establishes power over the country. This is important because there's the international community that's looking into the affairs of these countries, of these post-independent states, to establish their own power. So unless the government of the country establishes a stronger foothold of power first, they will be exploited again. So we're able to mitigate those harms in proposition solely because our constitution takes a short amount of time to build, and it's easier and more effective in the long run. So even if opposition comes up with the argument of instability in the long run, which I will get into in a bit, proposition can always say that they can respond better because they have already established stability to a vast extent, and they have a skeleton or like a base structure to fall on. So second argument for proposition on higher quality of legislation and policy, this is where you can talk about the effectiveness of the policies that are passed. Note that here you can cater to the actual issues at hand as opposed to pleasing the majority or pleasing a minority. This is where there is no claim for superiority of each ethnicity. This is where you don't have to worry about, the people spreading hate or the people having backlash on the policies that you pass. You can pass policies that better cater to the future of the country as opposed to a future of one ethnicity. So there is no rush to gain power, and you can finish off the constitution quicker. You can have better quality policies, and you can better capitalize and spread out the existing resources that you have, and you can build on the country from that end onwards. That is for proposition. On opposition, on the other hand, you can sort of go about it in a practical sense. What exactly does proposition offer, right? Proposition offers an approach that is very short-termist. Understand that even if you employ an integrationist constitution building model, even if you say that you are one nation, that you have one culture, you have one language, that it's just something that's in the constitution. It's not something that's technically in practice. You can, as opposition, you can question who exactly sets the constitution, right? It's more or less the majority, the politician, the ratio of representation of different ethnicities, of different minorities when you're building that constitution is going to be like a 3-to-1 ratio. There is going to be a majority, and the constitution is going to favor a majority. In this sense, even if in the short run the minority is like, yes, we want stability, in the long run they would feel threatened. They would feel like their identities are being wiped out, their cultures aren't being respected. This is very bad because that is where you start to riot. This is where civil unrest is formed again. See, proposition is going on a tangent of stability, on like importance of building a constitution, and like preserving resources and like saving time. But understand that in opposition you can say that even if you were able to save time, even if you were able to save resources in proposition at the beginning, towards the latter part, when you actually have to live in this country, you will still have to spend a lot of resources, spend a lot of time, spend a lot of your give a lot of your focus to amending the constitution to please the society for further down the line, right? There'll be civil unrest, and you'll have to keep making constant amendments. This is again a waste of time, a waste of resource that could have been avoided if you just set the constitution in a relatively stable manner, if you put a little more time, a little more effort into establishing a solid constitution. So what opposition can say is, in an accommodationist model, even if you spend a little bit extra like resources and time to establish a constitution, that constitution is likely to last a long time. So their arguments would look like long-term legitimacy, of the constitution, because you have a valid constitution. When you have to keep amending the constitution, that sort of takes away from the reverence of a constitution, from the stability of a constitution, right? That it doesn't, and even in the international community, you'll be marked as a country that doesn't recognize its minorities, right? This might lead your constitution to becoming very void, or at least having some kinds of flaws. So you sort of prevent those harms from happening in the first place. You establish long-term legitimacy by taking more time. The second argument for opposition could be inclusivity in diversity, where you're not trying to like sweep an entire like a whole set of minorities under rug. You include them in the constitution, you embrace the differences, you embrace the uniqueness of your country, of the culture of your different cultures of your country. You don't just conform to one language, one nation, because it's easy for you. Even if you were to tolerate little civil unrest in the beginning, you eradicate the potential civil wars that could happen further down the line. So this is like a way up between short-term gain and long-term gain. Again, proposition can counter this and say, even if they wanted to go towards a war in the further down the line, we still have enough resources to make sure that people aren't starving. We have enough stability to make sure that we can get help where we need help. We have established controls, we have trade still going on, and we are able to function in like at the minimum as a country, right? So again, it's based on how you present your arguments, how you weigh the two, depending on what was said in the debate. So the clashes for this motion could be unity versus diversity, where proposition talks about how urgent it is to have unity before you have diversity in the first place, and opposition can say no, diversity, even if it takes time, it's still important for long-term stability. Then again, it leads to the second clash that could come about in the debate, is the long-term, which side better caters to the long-term development of a country. So whether it's an integrationist approach, where you first make a solid constitution, you make a solid foundation, and you downplay the harms that can be caused through the colonial rule, or whether you resolve your conflicts, you resolve the issues, and then take a long-term approach to recognize all the differences, to recognize the stability of a country as a whole. So again, it depends on how you weigh the two and how you bring it around, how you present it at the debate. So yeah, that is my take on the quarterfinals motion. Thank you for listening.